Okay, for the last video for this lesson, we're just going to go through two more examples where the leading coefficient is negative. So for our first one, we have a leading coefficient of -5. So we're going to start by factoring a -5 out of our first two terms. And remember, factoring out is like undistributing or moving to the front. So we're going to rewrite this with -5 at the front. Inside the parentheses is what's left over if we divide out or undistribute a -5. So -5x squared, undistribute the -5, we just have x squared left. And then a positive 10x, undistribute or divide out a -5, we're left with -2x, because a positive over a negative is a negative. So with the negative coefficient, we just have to pay a little bit more attention to the signs. And then we still have -31 on the outside. Okay, so for our next step, we're going to complete the square. So we're going to have -5, and then we're going to open up a space inside our parentheses for us to add a number. That will turn that into a perfect square. And then we still need to subtract outside our parentheses, and we still have -31. Okay, so completing the square, we take our coefficient of x, -2, divide it in half, and then square it. That gives us -1 squared, which is +1. So we're going to add 1. And then to figure out what we subtract, we need to incorporate our leading coefficient. So we've actually added -5 times 1, which is -5. So when we subtract outside the parentheses, we're going to subtract -5. And this is where it gets a little weird, because we're subtracting a negative, but that's okay, we can do that. Okay, so now for the final step, we factor the perfect square that's in the parentheses, and we combine our like terms outside the parentheses. So we have -5 and then a perfect square, so it's x plus or minus something all squared. The number in the parentheses is our coefficient of x over 2, so -2 divided by 2 is -1. So it's x minus 1 all squared. And then when we combine our like terms, we have -5 minus 31. So the slightly weird thing here is that our -5 becomes positive, right? Because subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So this is like +5 minus 31, which is -26. Okay, so that's it. So we're now in vertex form, and we can identify our vertex. So the x-coordinate is inside the parentheses, and we flip the sign for our x-coordinates, so we get a +1. The y-coordinate is outside the parentheses, and we don't flip any y-coordinates, so we get -26. All right, so the negative leading coefficient doesn't change our process, it just adds a little bit more nuance with paying attention to the positives and negatives and how they change when we divide by negatives or multiply by negatives. Let's just do one more like that. So we have -7x squared minus 42x plus 11. First step is to factor out our leading coefficient of -7 from our first two terms. So we're going to undistribute -7 or move it to the front. And then inside the parentheses, we have what's left over if we undistribute the -7 or divide it out of those terms. So -7x squared, undistribute the -7, we're just left with x squared. -42x, undistribute or divide out a -7. So we have -42 over -7. That's going to give us a +6x. Negative over a negative is a positive. And then we still have plus 11 outside. All right, now we're going to complete the square. So we have -7 x squared plus 6x plus something. And then we subtract outside to keep our function the same, and then we still have plus 11 hanging out at the end. So to complete the square, we take our coefficient of x, which is 6, divide it in half, and then square it. So that gives us 3 squared, which is 9. So we're going to add 9 inside the parentheses. And then to figure out what number we subtract, we have to incorporate the leading coefficient, because everything inside those parentheses is being multiplied by -7. So we've actually added -7 times 9, which is -63. So when we subtract outside, we're going to subtract -63. All right, final step is to factor and combine like terms. So we have -7, and then the thing in the parentheses, we've turned it into a perfect square by adding the 9. So we know it's going to be x plus or minus something all squared. And the number in those parentheses is our coefficient of x divided by 2. So 6 over 2 is a positive 3. So we have x plus 3 all squared. Then outside the parentheses, we need to combine -63 and 11. And remember that a negative becomes a positive. So outside, it's like we have a plus 63 plus 11. So that gives us plus 74 outside. And there is our vertex form. So we're done. And if we want, we can quickly identify our vertex. The x-coordinate, we flip the sign and get -3. For the y-coordinate, we don't flip the sign and we keep it positive 74. All right, that's it for lesson 2.4.